My name's Hunter O'Haney, and I'm the director of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and we're very happy to have all of you here as well. I want to say hello to our guests this evening, Charles Ignacio and John Catania. Hello, gentlemen, say hello.
Hello, this is John.
Hi, where's Charles?
Can you guys see why Charles is on?
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, we just don't see you.
Oh, my video is stopped. That's strange.
There he is.
There he is. Hello, Charles. How are you?
Okay.
Where
Charles
are we
Ignacio.
Ignacio, thank you, Ignacio. Where are we finding you both this evening?
We're at our home in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Right down the street. And so you guys spend part of your time here and you spend part of the time in New York as well, right?
Yes, that's true. You know, I'm having, for some reason, you can see me, but now I can't hear you.
Okay.
So
Godzilla, can
let
you
me
help
see
me?
what's going on here.
We need to be
Well, I'm here.
Well, John, it's nice to see you. And of course, Charles, it's nice to see you as well, too.
Let me say, yeah, we still have a place up in Jersey City. Yep. where we did most of our career in the life and in television. Then we moved down here. So we're part-time each place now.
Great. And so we very much want to talk about the series, and we're going to look at some clips of that and be able to see that. I want to say hello to my colleague, Paula Sierra. Paula, are you back there somewhere? Thank you. Nice to see you, Paula. Paula will be here trying to help us out this evening and resolve any technical snafus. And Fadzil is there as well too. Just say hello, nice to see you. Thank you so much for helping us out. So if people have not been to the Stonewall National Museum and Archive, we are located here in South Florida. We're located in Fort Lauderdale. We've been around for 47 years, and we have what's believed to be the largest LGBTQ library in the world. We have over 28,000 volumes in fiction, nonfiction, art, poetry, theater, but biography, all organized under the Library of Congress system. And please feel free to go to our website at stonewall-museum.org, and you can actually search the card catalog there. And there are also a lot of study aids there as well too. So you can pick particular topics, whether it's trans criticism, or whether it's disco or the right to marry. They've all been curated, and you can find different topics of books there. Of course, if you're here in South Florida, you can stop by the library. We're happy to have everybody there. And in addition to the library, we have an archive. The archive is 2,700 linear feet. And just to understand how big that is, if you were to go up one side of the Empire State Building and all the way down the other, that's 2,700 linear feet. It totals about 6 million pages of LGBTQ history, mostly from 1950 to the present day. So we have serials, we have periodicals, we have subject files, and that material is used by researchers from around the globe, actually. Every week we have PhD students and other graduate students who are in there working on various projects, and it's a great resource for people. And of course, if you have papers and documents and serials, we say, please don't throw them away, give them to us and let us do that. Let us check if you have an old copy of the Mattachine Review or Drummer or some other magazine for us to be able to add and to be able to fill out these collections in that way. So you can find out about donating material to us through stonewall-museum.org, and you can certainly reach out to any of us as well too. We also do exhibitions, and so the exhibitions that we do really derive and come from the archives themselves. So right now we have an exhibition up called Don't Ask, Do Tell, which is looking at the relationship between the US military and the LGBTQ community over the last 225 years, starting with a lieutenant who was arrested in prison for sodomy in George Washington's time, all the way up to Joe Biden's time, in which there has been a tremendous amount of freedom for LGBTQ individuals who were serving in the military. Today, they say there are over 65,000 proud and open individuals serving in the military. And so we're happy that they have the rights to do it. And also it's very nice to see in the last couple of weeks that many of those who had been discharged over the last 100 years by the military have seen their rights be reinstated. They were benefits for the VA or other benefits. And so it's nice that we're making some real progress in that area. That exhibition will be up until the middle of the fall. And then in 2 weeks, we're actually opening another exhibition called Misinformation, the true and not so true facts about the early days of the AIDS crisis. And so what we did was we went back into the archive, and we have a whole series of books that we actually took off of our publicly facing shelves that had misinformation about AIDS in the very beginning. And then we looked at some of the gay serials at the time, particularly in 1982, 83, 84, and we looked at how misinformation was being spread. The similarities to what is going on today in the COVID situation is just really remarkable. So that show will be opening in 2 weeks. And so please feel free to come by and see that. There also will be a virtual component to that show as well. So if you're not here in South Florida, you can see that. And finally, I need to give a shout out to our friends at the Our Fund Foundation. They are the ones who helped make this series possible. And thank you very much for all the help that you do for LGBTQ communities or organizations here in South Florida, because they're the one who make all that possible. So I think those are the notes that I have. And so let's go back to Charles and John. Again, nice to see both of you. And you say that you're here in Fort Lauderdale. And I know you spend your time both here and in New York and Jersey City, as you say. So you had a program that was running from 1992 to 2012. And it really was, I think, a landmark in the life, was certainly a landmark a program about LGBTQ culture and history. And as we all know, this is LGBTQ History Month. Either one of you can start here, but tell us a little bit about how the program began.
Sure. Well, before I do that, I want to thank you, Hunter, for having John and me on, and also want to acknowledge UCLA Film and Television Archives, which without them, we wouldn't be able to be having this discussion or showing some of the clips. But yeah, also, I definitely want to say also, we are representing hundreds of people who volunteered their time working on the show over the 20-year span, as well as our founder, John Scagliotti, which is a nice segue into how the life got started. So John Scagliotti is a media documentarian. He created one of the first media programs on LGBT life called The Lavender Hour on Boston Public Radio. So that was his background. And then after that, he went on to produce a documentary called Before Stonewall, which many of you may have heard. So it was because of that experience that John had working in radio and being a producer of that renowned documentary, that he had the idea that public television should have also LGBT voices on the air. And he was working behind the scenes for a long time to make that happen. And so that's how I got involved. Was I read an article in a defunct magazine called Q magazine. You probably have an issue in your archives. And I saw a little article saying, you know, John Scagliotti is going to be talking about his concept of this public affairs television show for LGBT people. And he's going to be speaking at the center in New York City. So this was back, I think, in 1990 or 1991. I went to go hear him speak, and I talked to him afterwards and said, I'd love to get involved. I was at the time working at HBO after going through film school, and I wanted to get involved in an LGBTQ effort. So I started volunteering for him, stuffing envelopes, getting the word out, trying to raise
kitchen,
money.
Right? I think you were in his kitchen or his living room doing that.
Yeah, that's where we started. He had people in his living room, which was on Gansevoort Street back then, the meat packing district is not anything like it is now, but it was fun. It was scrappy. We were a whole year of doing this kind of fundraising effort. I remember we even had an auction at the old Limelight to try to raise money. And once we got the nugget of money to go into production, we started working on the pilot. And that's when John asked me to help co-produce the pilot with a woman named Pamela Jennings. So the two of us, along with John, we started work towards getting that produced.
In what PBS station were you guys? Were you working with GBH in Boston at the time, or were you working?
No, at that time, no.
Yeah.
Actually, because we were based in New York City, we went with WNYC,
Sure.
a station that doesn't exist anymore as a TV station. I believe it still has its radio station, but at the time we were with WNYC.
Got it. Okay. I think we have a clip of a montage of the 20 years of the series. And so let's take a look at that just to give people sort of a general sense of some of the images and things that happened.
Coming out around the time of Stonewall in the late 60s was so powerful because relatively few people had been able to do so before then. Coming out was a powerful first step in organizing, in self-actualization, and insisting on being who we are.
Frank came along with a very a clear vision in his mind of what we needed to do.
You had a whole establishment that had to be changed and reversed. And in order to get them to do that, you had to use political tactics.
People can't love you if they don't know you. They can't like you if they don't know you. You cannot fight for equality and be absent in the equation.
We would bring people together to have a space to talk and get to know each other. I mean, this was back then when there really were very few spaces that women could go to do anything.
It's all a construct, you know, the idea that people are supposed to behave in certain ways because of their gender. That's made up.
I still struggle with how I can be Muslim and practice the religion, but also be true to my sexuality. It's such a contradiction.
We have never before so needed the harmonious voices of a real diverse community. We need that now.
Thank you for that piece. It feels like just a little nugget and just like a little taste of those 20 years. So again, let's go back to the beginning. Was there a struggle, and were people generally in favor of it? Did people feel like, oh no, we can't have a program about gay topics on the air? How much of a fight was there?
My memory is that within our community, there was no fight at all. I mean, I was surrounded by LGBT people wanting to get this on. We were all very excited because it was a time when Clinton had just got elected. All the years of Reagan were behind us, or were going to be behind us. And there were lots of other kinds of LGBT cultural things that were starting to bubble up. There were new magazines, new organizations coming up. And so this seemed like part of the same kind of movement. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel any kind of resistance to this. It was just it was all kind of exciting, really.
Well, the resistance came from trying to get it on the air, and it was very difficult. There are certain parts of the country the series never was able to penetrate, because when the series was announced, and we're going to show you another clip in a minute that says some of the drama and controversy just around even announcing the show was going to be on the air. Of course, now that drama drew attention to it, which helped us raise money. I joined the show about a year in, so this is before me, but there was great resistance from the public stations because it briefly, the way the show was conceived, and John Scagliotti, again, brilliant in his founder to do this, we produced the show, and then we put it up on satellite. There wasn't internet bandwidth yet to upload a television show. So we would load it up on satellite and offer it to the 360 some public stations free of charge.
Mm.
And so there was no real obstacle to them airing it except the fear of the station program managers. And they had great fear. So when this show premiered in 1992, in June of 92, we had about a dozen TV stations, and that was it. And we eventually grew into several hundred. But in the beginning, stations were so afraid of this show, not only because of the reaction of their viewers, which of course keep them going by the money they give, they were afraid also of what gay people might do with their time on the air. I mean, what is there to talk about except sex among gay people, correct? Well, this was kind of the impression. So In the Life was put up on satellite. It was probably the only series of its time. And this went on, I think, for almost the entire 20 years of the series. It was the only series that needed to be put up weeks in advance so it could be screened and viewed. Not censored. We were only censored, I think, twice for frontal nudity, which was just part of a piece of art that was hanging on a wall. But we were never censored, but they were afraid of what we might do at that time. They were afraid that we would, be such an advocacy program, which wasn't allowed on PBS. And so there was great fear of that. And so in the beginning, there was about a dozen stations. I was later, besides being a producer and the communications director, to get the word out. It was another challenge. We also had to work very hard to get stations to take us on. And that could dominate this whole discussion. So the landscape at that time was very scary in media. I also think that this gets to the heart of why we needed to do the series. If anybody remembers those 80s that we had just come out of, I mean, there were so many voices on television that were just very, very, just vilifying us for being perverts, for destroying the family, for you can't adopt children, you can't get near children. So we were the only voice on television in that time, 5 years before Ellen and all that stuff, that was countering all of that constant negative. They could go on news programs and say these things about us. So that's why In the Life needed to happen at that time. But it scared stations greatly.
Yes, and of course, to let our viewers remember a little bit about the context in the early 90s, we were definitely coming out of that period of time in which, or you were coming out of that period of time in which people were saying AIDS was some kind of divine justice on gay people, and that that idea was being put out there. And then, of course, we saw the culture wars in the late 80s with Jesse Helms and D'Amato and trying to shut down sexual content, gay related content that had really nothing to do with sex but had to do with art. And so it was a scary time, I think, for gay people. And so that was kind of the basis of my question here, because I certainly remember that time period well. And also I think John, the points that you raise here about the fact that, number one, it was free, and we all know that public television has to pay for each local station has to pay for money for certain content that they put out.
Not ours.
But yours was completely free to them. And then also that they would have to, or they had to have the right to be able to review it because of content, or the fact that you guys were just telling facts. And because of
Mostly.
who you were telling facts, the assumption was it was advocacy tied to those particular facts. And so a lot of hurdles for you to get over in the beginning.
Absolutely. And I think that's why at the beginning, John Scagliotti's conception of this show was more to showcase the talents of the LGBTQ community. And so it took the form of a variety show. He didn't want to get into the controversy so much. At the beginning, he didn't want to go into the oppression part of the LGBTQ community. He wanted to make it as comfortable for a mainstream audience to introduce LGBT people going into their living rooms. And that was the thinking behind the format for the show when it first started.
I certainly don't have a laundry list of them, but as I think back and I think about, something like An American Family and having a gay character on that show in the 1970s, I mean, there wasn't really a lot for people to look at. I mean, it was not a topic that was discussed. And as you said, for regular commercial broadcast programs, this was before Will and Grace and Ellen DeGeneres and any of that kind of stuff. So,
right.
And
I mean, what I do recall
Right.
were TV movies about AIDS characters who are dealing with AIDS. That was starting to become big. You'd see celebrities who would get acclaim for playing a gay character who had AIDS.
Right.
I remember that period too.
and again,
But
many of those ended up with a negative end to the story as well too. I mean, somebody ended up dying as opposed to presenting a positive face, which is what you guys did with the show. You being the entire team did with the show was put positive faces to say these are just like everybody else. John?
Correct.
Well, yeah, and a great challenge we also had was just putting those positive faces, just having people go on and talk about their lives was actually controversial. And we were getting, it was my job in the beginning to talk to the media. So I would be talking to all the major critics, whether it was at the Times or the Washington Post or any of them. And the beginning, they were like, well, you're not balanced. And I said, what's not balanced about us? Because at that time, Nightline or any of these news programs, whatever they were called, couldn't do anything unless the opposing voice was some far-right minister saying that this is sinful. And I'm serious, we could not. And so when we were the first program that decided that was not necessary, we are not going to put someone on, we were not going to put someone on the air that basically said we were immoral because we felt that that was settled. We felt that that issue was settled. And the critics at first didn't understand why we didn't have those, because we said that's not balanced, that's unnecessary. And so it took us and me a while to convince them to look at our show and review it. The first was John O'Connor from the New York Times, who put us on the map, because once he reviewed us, the rest of the critics around the country came in line. He gave us credibility. But we were at a time, it's not that long ago, but it was at a time when the only way to balance queer people in media was to have someone on there that said they were a perversion. And we said, we don't have airtime for that. We have too many precious stories to tell.
Right. And in addition to that, on the flip side, the people in front of the camera that we were trying to get to be interviewed, it made sense that in the beginning, it was mostly a lot of LGBTQ artists that were already out in the theatrical community and the arts community, especially in New York City, that were more comfortable to being on a show like In the Life. But when we started doing issues-oriented stories, or we wanted to do stories about politics, it was more difficult at the beginning to get people to come on the show and publicly identify as LGBTQ, or even to be assumed that they were LGBTQ because they were on a show like In the Life. I mean, it was my policy as the producer to make sure that anyone who was on the show, we would show what their name was at the bottom and what their title was. And so there were some people that had a problem with that. So I'm not completely out at work, or I don't feel comfortable being on your show, so they couldn't be on. So my policy was, you're going to be on In the Life, you have to be comfortable having your name appear on your image as well as your title. And that was a big deal back then. Hard to believe.
Very brave people, very brave individuals.
Yes, they were certainly brave. And again, just to underscore the importance, how time has changed, and also the fact that now it's that particular point. I mean, here we are doing a program talking about a library with 28,000 gay books and, an archive with 6 million pages, and, which was unheard of at that time. But I hope you guys sort of stop and think the role that you played in creating this as a platform within culture. It's how change happens, quite frankly. Right. Change happens in a lot of different ways. And the fact that pioneers who did this kind of work and sort of set standards, not that you were being unfair, but the fact you just set the same standard that everybody else would have to do. Just like if somebody was on Nightline or somebody was on 60 Minutes, you're going to put their name underneath them, and you're going to treat them just like everybody else.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
no, it's a wonderful thing. I think I think you guys might have the pilot queued up.
Oh yeah.
Let's take a look at that, because I bet things have changed a little bit since that pilot in 1992. Does somebody
Yeah,
want
this is
a little bit of a setup for it?
No,
Charles, you want to? Or it's really just,
it's pretty
go ahead.
self-explanatory.
You were there. It's your show. You were there.
All right, the pilot. You'll see.
Go ahead.
Should be, here it comes. And these, what you'll see, these are the
June 1992, before a live audience and with Kate Clinton as our host.
Two's around on Kate, 2 on Kate.
There we were, the pilot episode of In the Life, the first series bringing the issues and culture of gay and lesbian life to television. But it didn't take long before our series on national public television came under attack during the PBS funding wars of the early 90s. In a sense, we have Bob Dole to thank for letting America know we were out there.
It seems that the broadcasting apologists are hiding behind Big Bird, Mr. Rogers, and Masterpiece Theater, laying down their quality smokescreen while they shovel out funding for gay and lesbian variety shows.
His attack on In the Life from the floor of the U.S. Senate made headlines before we even aired. Dole referred to In the Life as the Gay Ed Sullivan Show, and in a way he was right. The pilot episode was a variety show, a format we stayed with for the first season. In the Life. In the Life television aired its first episode in June of 1992.
Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, gosh, not another show on gays and lesbians on television.
Years from now, down the line, we'll remember and we'll all sing.
Luckily, we've thought of everything, and we are closed captioned for the homosexually challenged. Isn't that wonderful? Already, you have seen more gay men and lesbian on television, on network television, than you have seen ever.
We tried to do a lot, and we did a lot. I was struck by the number of people who thought the PBS was their constitutional right. And when their local channel wouldn't put on In the Life, they organized and they got together in ways that they never would have before.
That's so great, and of course, it's so great to see Kate. Kate there.
Kate,
she's
hello.
wonderful. And
she was great.
Yeah, she and Urvashi are in Provincetown right now, and so it's so great to see her. So yeah, so Charles, tell me a little bit about how it feels to see those early episodes.
It brings back a lot of warm memories. I'm sure I probably blocked out all the stress involved in putting together something like that, because if you told me now what it would entail to do something like that, I definitely would have said no. But back then we didn't really know what we were doing. You know, John cobbled together a lot of volunteers and people like me who had very minimal television production background. We were relying on the kindness of other strange LGBTQ people, not strange, strangers who wanted to work on this show. So when I look at that, I think of the hundreds of volunteers behind the scenes. You know, we were tacking up cloth to camouflage. That was the Jane Pratt show's studio, and we were allowed to shoot there for free as long as we made it look like it wasn't the Jane Pratt show. So I had friends from the center who were in theater, and they knew how to get bolts of cloth for free at Materials for the Arts in Brooklyn. And so we'd bring the bolts of cloth over. We'd be stapling, people be stapling cloth in the background. So that's just the set part. And then finding a roll of linoleum to roll on the floor, but also just wrangling the talent. You know, the day that we shot, I'm remembering we had a couple of other floors in that studio building. I think it was in the West 30s in Manhattan. So on one floor we had the Gay Men's Chorus, and another floor we had the Lavender Light Gospel Chorus. Plus we had a film panel that included the filmmaker Todd Haynes, who had just come out with his movie Poison, and lesbian filmmaker Sue Friedrich, and you know, so it was all these other kinds of independent East Village artists. You know, it was so cool. It was like a circus back there, like a 3-4 ring circus. So I remember that day as being chaotic, but also I have warm feelings about it, because I remember once the camera started rolling and the chorus started singing and Kate started talking, how I can't believe we're doing this. It's like, gosh, it's actually happening. We're really going on the air, or we're putting this on tape to go on the air later. And it was so thrilling and very, 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 you know, rewarding to be part of.
And so, John, you were with the show not from the very beginning, but from very early on. You joined when?
I joined in 1993, which was the next year. Right. And they went into after the 1 hour pilot, they went into a 1 hour program, which was still kind of entertainment based, but they started to get into more cultural stories, more cultural packages of reporting. And I came in with absolutely no experience. I had met Charles out socially, and I don't know if it was established at the beginning, but we're married. We've been together since 27 years since that first year. And so, thank you. Yeah. And he brought me, I remember meeting him, and of course, and he said, well, what do you do? I said, I work for a gay TV show. And I said, what gay TV show? You know, the word wasn't on the street yet. I hadn't been reading anything about it. So I immediately became interested in the project and started volunteering, and very quickly moved up because they needed so much help. The first story I ever produced, besides my communications work, the first story I ever produced was on Angels in America on Broadway. My whole background up until the day I met Charles, my whole career from college on was acting. I was a professional singer actor. And so one of my beats in the life as a reporter, producer, was Broadway. What a dream. I mean, my first interview was Tony Kushner. So of course I didn't know what I was doing, but I learned pretty quickly. And then I went on to do a lot of other theater stories. We have a clip from one of them we may have a chance to show you. So I really got involved kind of because I was courting Charles. And so that on top of this amazing opportunity that I had to, and also it's hard to, I was a song and dance man, I was in theater. So, and that was very satisfying. But in the early 90s, Bill Clinton had just been elected. There was all of this, dozens and dozens of gay or LGBT organizations formed in the early 90s out of that energy. And none of them quite felt right to me, but In the Life came along, that wonderful fluke I met Charles, came along, and immediately I saw it as something that could take my energy and my passions. And so I stayed with it for 20 years associated with it. We both did. So I came in 1993.
Having been married to a production stage manager, particularly of musicals, for the last 30 years, I have to ask you, what shows were you in, John? What shows?
No, these are all in the Midwest, and I could list the Gilbert and Sullivan and the musicals, but once I moved here, I met Charles quickly after. Here, well, I'm in Florida now, but once I moved to New York City, I met Charles very shortly after, and the whole direction of my life changed completely. Yeah. So.
Very good.
I'd love to say I did some Broadway, but no.
No. Well, that's still, it was great for you to be able to do it. And the idea of being very early on and doing an interview with Tony Kushner, of course, was an amazing opportunity, I'm sure. So again, so now when we think about the fact that it had been, we saw it here at the beginning, it was on for 20 years. When did the show hit its stride? And we heard a little bit about how there was some resistance, but so tell me about when you felt the show was mature and it was really sort of just grinding along and really doing, you were really sort of moving it along. How did the format flesh out that way?
Well, I think actually it happened within the first season. Within the first year, we started getting inklings of where it was going to evolve to, and that was because I think less than a year after the pilot came the 1993 March on Washington. Mm-hmm. And so we decided to get out of the studio and bring our cameras down to DC, and we were working with Garrett Glazer as a co-host and Karen Williams, who is a stand-up comic, African-American lesbian comic. We brought them down and we went on location to do stories from the march. And that gave us a taste of what it was like to get out of the studio situation. So I think once we got back to New York after the 93 March program, we were starting to do more packages, meaning stories that were edited as opposed to just a live camera on a studio audience.
Right.
Also, the move towards that kind of a format, I think, was also pushed because the cost of producing television was coming down. And it was also very expensive to shoot a live audience with 3 cameras. And so we knew that we had to evolve and change just for budgetary reasons, but also we wanted to tell more stories outside of New York City. As I said, the going to DC in 93 gave us a taste of what that was like. We interviewed people from around the country down in DC. And that was the beginning of doing these packaged segments, pre-edited segments that we then put together in a news magazine format. And I would say after 2nd, 3rd, 4th, the 5th year, we really were.
I would say
really
year
good at
5, year 4,
yeah.
year 5, we found our stride, not only in, I would say that by then we had taken on every flagship US PBS station was probably airing us by then. So we were able to pull in, Philadelphia, all the big cities, all the big cities. We were getting regular press coverage by the major critics. And that was another challenge because the show aired very late at night and in some markets, like after 11. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But of course, partially it was because it was queer subject matter and stations were very afraid of it. So they would air it late at night, and I would call the critics and say, you got to look at the show. And they would say, well, you air too late. We'd have a policy of not reviewing anything after a certain time. And I would say, you have to, this is groundbreaking, blah, blah, blah. And they eventually came on board. So I would say we found our stride with lots of good reviews. I remember a few from the Chicago Tribune, Washington Post came on board, LA Times gave us a wonderful review. These are all probably about year 4. And so we were building our stations. We were getting reviews we could then use to raise money, and money is always a problem in nonprofit. We never had enough, but we were able to keep the show going. That's really a tribute to Charles, being able to do that. My God.
And then
and
also
we found our style of programming.
And because of this attention that we were getting from the press and from the public, we'd get people who are working in network television and cable television. And hi, Matt Paco, I know he's watching. He's one of our producers. One of our producers who was working at MTV, I think, at the time, and came to us knocking on the door saying, hey, I'd love to do a story for you guys. And, you don't have to pay me as much as I get paid for my regular job. But so we were starting to start to work with news producers who are working at the networks and cable shows.
Yeah, we had Barbara Raab from NBC News, wrote for Tom Brokaw. She wrote for us. We had all these people moonlighting, and they would come to us and say, I can't possibly do this story where I'm working at the network, but I want to do this story. And they would have their 6 or 8 or 10 minutes, whatever, and they could produce these stories for us. And so it was it really worked out. We had a lot of people from the networks moonlighting and doing things for us.
And of course,
it was really a blessing.
Doing a professional television program like this, you do have to have expertise, and you do have to have resources, and you need to find people who know those things. But it's so wonderful to hear the story, those that were in the corporate world, particularly in the broadcast world at the time, who had that expertise, but also were aligned with what you were doing and just wanted to present the same news stories out there, or at least put them in the right format out there, so that the viewer, because the whole point, of course, is to give the viewer truth and to give the viewer other points of view that they might not get someplace else. And without even an agenda, without advocacy, you were just happening to put the truth of the LGBTQ community out there. Intentionally, of course, but that's what you were trying to do, as opposed to advocating for one particular point of view. It also seems like you had that you had success in trying to mix news and politics, which are fair game, certainly, but news and politics and entertainment as well, too. And that was one of that seemed to be part of your secret too. It wasn't just 60 minutes where it was just like one news story after another. You were able to put art in and entertainment there as well.
Well,
Yeah,
if you really want to know, go ahead.
Go-
I know what you
no,
what story we modeled ourselves after.
Yeah, we were modeling ourselves after Sunday Morning on CBS. In fact, we got to work with some great editors and producers from Sunday Morning on CBS because we like that format of storytelling, you know, where you can do a little bit of news at the beginning or, you know, human interest here or there. And as I said, we wanted to share the stories of the LGBTQ people around the country. And in some episodes, we got to go around the world. That allowed us to have a variety of kinds of stories in the limited time that we had.
And we would watch CBS Sunday Morning together and say, oh, there's an idea for us and a way to approach a story. And we were really stealing their style as much as we could with a lot less dollar signs.
Yeah, but what a great model to be working from for that. Well, so you guys have another clip, I think, ready here called From Language of Their Own. Can we take a look at that?
Yeah, I need to introduce it briefly because this is a story I did. I think it was 94 and 95. Won an award for the show. I'm very proud of that. And it was it really brought us some really issues that around diversity and also issues that were facing the show. One note to understand, it's about a show that was at the Public Theater called The Language of Their Own. B.D. Wong in the beginning references the name Ming, and that's because he played Ming in this show. And that's all you really need to know.
I want to try to create, in its truest sense, an American theater, which is a theater that is comprised of telling as many different stories as it possibly can.
I definitely relate to Ming's dilemma as an American-born Asian person, specifically an American-born Chinese. And I really did not like being an Asian person when I was a teenager, when I was aspiring to be a younger actor. I really thought that not being a white person just kept me from getting everything that I wanted. And then it was really when I was in this play, Butterfly on Broadway, that I understood the beauty and the power and the wonderfulness of being an artist of color.
By candlelight. I think Asian American men are typically looked at as sexless or as sexually passive.
Like racism, homophobia is not always pinpointable. You can't always tell when it's happening or who it's coming from. You just know that there's something wrong. And so it's not easy to say, well, I didn't get this part because of homophobia or because I played a gay character. You don't always really know. And that's the awful, elusive thing about it.
There's so much crappy, sort of racist, sexist, homophobic conditioning that is there without people even knowing it. It's a war. It's a war doing culture in America in which you're not trying to affirm a European aesthetic is war. That's it.
Industry people, casting directors, producers, and people that are gatekeepers don't necessarily understand or appreciate that aspiration of diversity or the artist's ability or wish to be those many things. So those gatekeepers don't always understand, oh wow, that gayness or that issue of playing a gay person is just part of a wonderful spectrum of work.
That's it.
That's great. Of course, it's so lovely to see him in and so articulate and so great to be able to see how clear he was. So remind us again, what year was that?
1995.
Right.
And it brought, and it kind of rings true even for the show because there were a lot of gatekeepers at the time. You remember there were only 4 networks at the time and there wasn't all this cable and everything as much. So there were gatekeepers that were keeping us out of certain markets. So that kind of rang true, just what he said. But sure. I like that story a lot.
I think the other thing, of course, is that, you know, you look back on something like that, which is over 20 years old, and you think so many of those issues that are raised in that interview are issues that somebody who is 22 years old or 24 years old can be talking about the exact same thing. But now they're actually talking about it in a broader way beyond just the LGBTQ community. They're talking about it with regard to a racial or gender thing as well, too. he really put his finger on a lot of issues.
Right, exactly. And I think, what George C. Wolfe, and that's the director who's speaking at the very beginning, is saying, though some things are like that, we're still combating, as you're saying, Hunter. I do think things have changed a lot. For example, George C. Wolfe, who's in that interview, his film Ma Rainey's Black Bottom was one of the nominees for the best film last year at the Oscars. And what B.D. Wong is talking about, representation in media in terms of being Asian, we now have like Shang Li, and the Legend of the Ten Rings being the biggest blockbuster movies out there, along with Black Panther and the Marvel movies. So things have changed a lot in 20 years. We're seeing more diversity of people in our mainstream films and theater.
But that story got a lot of attention, and in the reviews, because it was really saying things. I remember the Chicago Tribune said the show looks familiar, but they say things on the show you don't hear anywhere else on television. So I thought that that was a nice thing to say about our show, and that really helped us actually.
Sure. No, that's absolutely true. So between the period of time that you started and the time that you stopped producing the shows, a lot of things happened. Certainly between 1994 and 2012, a lot of things happened with regard to gay acceptance and with legal issues, and things happened. It seems like one of the things that you guys were involved with, and I know, Charles, you've been involved with, certainly the right to marry. How big of an issue did that come up? Or how big of an issue was that in the series?
Sure. Well, we immediately knew that was something that was important. Even in the first season, we followed the couples that were suing for the right to marry in Hawaii. That was in the early 90s. And then we continued on again, of course, decades later, when the marriage equality movement started building up steam in this country with the efforts of a lot of our national organizations. And so we also did many stories around that issue as well. So starting from the very beginning, we followed it over the years until it finally, marriage equality happened after the show went off the air nationally, but we did follow it pretty much throughout the run of In the Life. I think we have a clip maybe that we can show from the very beginning, the first story that we talked about this issue.
Great, and this is about marriage equality in Hawaii. And just as a reminder to everybody, I want to say hello to our friends on Facebook if you're out there, and feel free to throw questions into the chat on Facebook, or also feel free to throw them on here because we'll certainly look at those and be able to pass those as we move along. But let's take a look about the marriage in Hawaii piece.
The couples applied for their licenses on Monday morning, December 17th, 1990, at the Department of Health in Honolulu.
3 couples went down to fill out applications for a marriage license, and we were followed by camera crews and newspaper reporters, and of course there were other people in there, regular heterosexual couples getting marriage licenses at the same time.
When we went down to the Department of Health, the woman who actually took our application seemed very relaxed about it. She was about to give us our license. And then her boss came over and said, "Oh, I don't think you should do this." And he took us into a back room and said, "Well, we're going to have to ask the Attorney General." And the press was there, and we left without our license that day and told them we'd sue them.
On May 5th, 1993, the Hawaiian Supreme Court issued its decision.
A male and a female walk in and they're not married, they want a license, you give it to them. A male and a male walk in, want a license, you won't give it to them. You are discriminating against them.
The celebration began just hours after the High Court's ruling.
I just feel great. I feel elated. It's like a burden has been taken off my shoulders.
It's now up to the state to prove compelling interest for banning same-sex marriages, a difficult legal task. But for the couples involved, the political ramifications are less important than the simple fact of marriage itself.
I never thought of it as a protest. Some people may think that we're gay activists, but we're not. We're really just 2 people in love.
So what happened, after that story happened with those couples, the Hawaiian Constitution was changed by the legislature to define marriages between being a man and a woman. There was a huge fight in Hawaii, so it set us back there.
I want to make sure that we mention in this hour that I want to segue just briefly to the fact that we followed that story over 2 decades. And of course, there was a lot more to the story after the show was off the air. But Charles actually instituted this policy that In the Life saved every single videotape and beta tape we ever shot. And that was very unusual for a news magazine. We usually would tape over them to save money, tape over and tape over, but we saved every single tape. So it's up to 10,000 tapes. And all of those were deposited at the UCLA Film and Television Archive in Los Angeles, in their deep storage in cold. So, and I only say that because all of this history that right now seems quite recent, in 100 years, all of this video is going to be available. And I think it's wonderful to point out the great work that Hunter and Stonewall is doing, archives, because how important is this going to be? And that In the Life was there to cover this story and many stories, gays in the military, the whole thing. That will be available to historians and documentary producers for forever, whatever that means.
Well, and not only that, the UCLA Film and Television Archive is part of the deal with accepting the archive of videotapes, created a website portal specifically for In the Life's archive.
So this is there's a home screen. So all 20 years are streaming up there.
Yeah, anyone can access this website anywhere in the world. You just need to Google UCLA and In the Life, and this web portal will come up, and all the episodes are accessible, and you can screen them, all 20 years worth of In the Life episodes.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's really an important point. I think also it's important to point out with USC, of course, they have provided a tremendous amount of help and assistance to the One Archive, which is a very similar archive to ours.
Right.
And since they started with the archives and papers of One magazine, and then they've collected many things from California. So it's great, and they're wonderful colleagues of ours as well. But for them to take on this, so over 20 years, how many episodes of the show were actually aired?
I think it's several hundred, right?
It's about 280 some, I think. It's close to 300.
So let's say 300 episodes, but then there's 10,000 tapes. And we think about the idea that to actually make a particular program, there's only a small percentage that actually gets it into the program. And exactly to your point about the fact that those videotapes are generally used over and over, but that you had the foresight to be able to say, no, we actually are recording history. That's not our job necessarily right now. Our job is to be putting together a television show, but you also realized your job at the time, we are recording history. So all of the outtakes, everything that's there, things that were left on the proverbial cutting room floor that didn't make it into the show, that will be of use to researchers in the future, that those conversations took place and that they're being preserved. Is just an amazing gift that you've given to LGBT archives.
That's a really good point, Hunter, because the shooting ratio was what, Charles? About 10 to 1 of
I would say 10 to 1.
10 to 1. So let's say you have a 6-minute story. You might shoot 60 plus minutes there. So you might have an interview with an Urvashi Vaughn or a Larry Kramer, and you might use 2 minutes of it for the program. But sitting on the shelf for historians is another 30 plus minutes that no one really ever got to see. So it's in there. It's waiting for historians and documentarians to find. There's thousands and thousands of hours that were never seen that are there for historians to mine now.
Definitely.
And so it's so great. And Paul, if we can actually be sure to throw the link up on here as well too. Charles just mentioned it, but I'd love to be able to share the link. And as he said, if we're not able to share it, one can certainly find it through any easy search on a search engine. So talk a little bit about the show's ending. Talk about what was happening in 2011 and sort of coming to a conclusion. Had it run its course? Were there other influences? Why did it stop?
I'll give that one to you, John.
Oh, well, you know, it was really, I think the board of directors had been doing their best to keep it funded, and it was a challenge. It became, you know, more and more of a challenge as well as you know, marriage issue and other issues seemed more funding priorities for the great philanthropists that keep these projects going. The main one in the life was Henry Van Amerongen, who passed away just in the past year, Charles, I believe. And Henry really kept the show on the air. He represented about a third of the funding for that program over the years. And then we had a whole membership program and then other foundations. But I think that the board, first of all, 20 years, 2 decades, sounded like a good number. And I think they just had felt the show, there was a lot more media out there. I mean, we almost every set time we talk like this, we say, when can the show come back on the air? It's a little bit more of a challenge to do that. I just think it became, it seemed like a good time to go. They felt they were a strong program at the end. Again, it was the board of directors' decision. It wasn't a staff decision. And it was just a combination of things. They felt that it accomplished its mission. And I think they also felt that it was now time to concentrate on the next big challenge, not big project for the show, which was archiving it. Because there were times when we had thousands of tapes in keepers' lockers all around the city. I mean, we couldn't keep it at the office. It was in storage lockers and, you know, here and there. And so it was time to get serious about preserving it. And that took a whole nother effort.
So how much support did you get from PBS or from the more national? Okay, I'm seeing a big zero there. Anything you want to say about that?
You know,
PBS was gracious to show us, but it wasn't actually PBS. It was American Public Television, which is another distributor to PBS. PBS had nothing to do with us. We went in the back door. We produced the show, offered it to the stations as individual deals, and PBS. So it's a complicated relationship, but PBS had nothing to do with the funding or anything else.
Yep.
Right.
Charles, does that sum it up?
No, yeah, no, that's true. We did not apply for any funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is the main funding arm of PBS. I think once, you know, we were so small and scrappy at the beginning that once we started finding our stride, we didn't want the strings that came attached to something like that as well. I believe we were doing fine.
That's fair enough. In the sense, of course, with that kind of support, in the sense one might say, oh, this would be great because the Corporation for Public Broadcasting could open so many doors and with revenue and stuff. But of course, there were strings that would be associated with it. So
it would have been very difficult for them to do that. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
My last question for the two of us, we only have, or for the three of us, we only have a few minutes left here. So you both have under your belts 20 years of experience doing this series. And, you know, it's the technical side of doing it. And also it is the creative side in which you created a program and a series that was successful at a time in which there was nothing else there. And so you've been through that. And you've now had about a decade. Obviously, you've spent a lot of time with the archives, and you're familiar, and you're sort of you've been involved in it. But if you can put that aside, and if I were to say to you, or someone were to say to you today, you know, what do we need in 2022 for LGBTQ programming? First question is, do we need LGBTQ programming today? And if the answer to that is yes, what would that look like?
I think definitely yes. What it would look like would be more decentralized than I think one program on one station looks like now. The way that people can access different articles on the internet, like a Reddit kind of a platform. I'd like to see some kind of a portal that would point to lots of different producers out there who are already creating media on YouTube, already doing their own stories on YouTube, but some way to gather them together and mine them and trying to get the best of those stories, as well as a capability of helping to fund and train the next generation of storytellers, like what we saw in the Life.
John?
Yeah, In the Life was actually very good at that. We used a lot of young LGBT talent, and I think that was another big legacy of that show. A lot of out. It was not easy necessarily, and we did the Garrett Glazers and the other one. What others will tell you, it was not easy to be out producer in media, especially in any sort of news bent program, because they really thought you were biased. How could you produce on, so a lot of people got their start within the Life, or a lot of people were able to do some really good, smart things with the program, put it on the reel and get work out there elsewhere after the show, after they left the show. Catherine Linton, who we definitely need to mention in this program, Jack Gary's, Desirina Almarati, Janet
Daniel
Balson, yeah, I'm mentioning all women, but women especially would get a really good start In the Life, out lesbian women that it was a harder road in the networks or other outlets in the 90s. So I think that is a real legacy. Is the show needed? I say, I changed my answer, I think, because this is asked almost every program. Why can't it be back on, or do we need? I'm starting to come around to think we do need something like this back on the air. And decentralized is good, but I especially miss it on PBS. PBS is always scrounging around for trying to find queer programming, and there's just such a limited amount, and so I thought that there were so many stories being told now by young people, but now I'm starting to think, when I look at these stories again, we're diving into the archive, I really think we could use it. I don't know any idea how it would happen.
Well, I just want to give a shout out again to Catherine Linton, who you saw.
Yeah, she does great work.
Original host. She just won an Emmy Award for producing the series Pride Land, which did air on PBS stations this past spring. So again, I think that's a legacy of In the Life, that we have somebody who went on to win an Emmy for doing another LGBT kind of a limited series, but looked at what it was like to be LGBTQ growing up in the South and in small rural areas of the country, which got recognized with an Emmy Award this year. So congratulations to her.
And of course, we touched on that before, and I'm always so fascinated with the idea about rural gay life versus those of us who spend more time around urban centers. We get very biased about those things, and we think that's where the whole gay world evolves around. That's not true, and so it's not true. We have come to the end of our time here, and I just have to say, John and Charles, thank you so much. You're just so great to chat with. This has been such a great conversation. Paula and Fadzil, I want to thank both of you for your help here, and for all of you for joining us. Again, this is a production of Stonewall National Museum and Archives. You can find us at stonewall-museum.org. If you are in South Florida, please come and see us. And good night, everybody, and we will see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much.